respected former member of former president of the Macedonian Academy of Art and Sciences, Professor and head of the Center for Strategic Research that are hosting our event today. Respected academician and also director of the Lexicography Center of the Macedonian Academy of Art and Science, respected guests, yes, and colleagues. We are so happy to have you today as an audience of this very specific event. This is the lecture and the discussion of our very special guest, Professor Stiven Fridman, who will talk about the philosophy of science, the limits of controlled experimentation. So a very interesting topic that is pretty suitable to this place that are hosting us today, the Macedonian Academy of Art and Sciences. So we really thank our host for quickly responding to our initiative to give this talk and give the discussion here in the Academy. And there is another reason for that, because Professor Stiven Fridman has a very interesting intellectual profile that connects both art and science and also many other things, I would say, because his education, his basic education, his first love in theory is philosophy, right? So he has a BA degree in philosophy from Harvard, cum laude, right? But then his interest spread across many other fields, especially natural sciences, physics, mathematics, and biology, especially molecular biology. And his contributions to molecular biology and medicine range from developing methods to work out the structure of viruses to conceiving smart chemotherapeutics against cancer, right? Very interesting and important field of research. But also his writings, his numerous writings include philosophy, poetry, and plays. And his visual arts range from representational pastels to acrylic under acrylic poles. And it has been featured in numerous solo and group exhibitions and has entered major private collection around the world. In our Macedonian community, artistic and intellectual, Professor Fridman is more actively present for about a year, if I'm not wrong. And so he also had his philosophical play, Falaris Bull, Solving the Riddle of the Great Big World, performed at this year's edition of the Summer Festival with considerable success. And also there were some others, performances of his play in Macedonia. We are really very honored to have him here today to share a part of his philosophical reflection on the topic of philosophy of science, the limits of controlled experimentation. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Professor Friedman, and I think that after the lecture we will have some time for discussion, right? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that kind introduction. Is it better if I stand? Can you hear me better if I'm standing? This is better. It projects a little better? Okay, fine. Standing is a fine option for me. Enumerate a list of people, but I was told that I could sort of avoid that and just give a general thank you to the Academy and its members. I'm very appreciative, of this opportunity and this occasion. My talks in general are not scripted, so this is not. And I never quite know in advance what I'm going to say. And ideas can be communicated or represented. I write aphoristically, concentrated statements, philosophical statements, sometimes characterized as verbal mathematics. At this point, there might be more than 20,000 such aphorisms. I could begin this talk, any talk, from any one of those aphorisms, which means any one of those different perspectives, and achieve a reasonable representation of the results. And I never know in advance who will respond most sort of intuitively to whichever direction of approach I take. So if we had this talk again tomorrow, which I recommend, it will be totally different. The talk that I'm going to give now is different than what I was imagining doing 3 hours ago. So again, the fluidity of that, the flexibility of that is germane to the nature of the results, and I think their power, their significance. So we're not tied to just one narrow formulation. What I've decided to start today with is a little bit of a reflection on number, because we're dealing with, we'll see, levels of precision in thought, a high level of precision in philosophical thought. And precision is often represented in quantitative terms. Human beings are not evolutionarily adapted to number. There are cultures where the number system is 1, 2, 3, many. Even us here now. Now it doesn't work so well with fingers because we know how many fingers are on a hand. But in general, if I show one object, you can see immediately without counting that that's 1. If I show 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, any more than that, you have to count. If I held up 6 or 7 or 8 pencils, you will not immediately identify that number. That's how limited our intuitive grasp of number is. And it matters profoundly in the sciences, it matters profoundly in philosophy, it matters profoundly in terms of what we're doing today. And to illustrate a little bit more of that, because I know I've referenced my background in molecular biology, and that's going to become important when we talk about the central topic, controlled experimentation, because my background in controlled experimentation comes mainly from molecular biology. We have a very poor grasp of everything going on in biological systems intuitively. And to give you a sense of that, and it's profoundly important to understand the nature of our limitations as much as it is to be able to explore any of our strengths. There's an enzyme in all of our cells called catalase. Its job is to break down hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is an antiseptic. It's an agent that is toxic to cells. It is a byproduct of normal cellular metabolism. It's being produced all the time in our cells. We need to get rid of it or we die. Catalase has that function. There are thousands or millions of copies of catalase in any given cell at any given time. One molecule, and catalase is protein, an enzyme, has a fairly complex structure, but there's one of it. The structure it's a particular structure. One catalase molecule is capable of breaking down 40 million molecules of hydrogen peroxide per second. We can't grasp that. We have no sense of what that actually is, and that's the nature of biological processes. So, again, we are limited in terms of our grasp of that type of precision. Now, in another direction, Einstein's theory of general relativity had several important validations experimentally early on. One was in terms of the Newtonian prediction. I'm not going to go into a whole detailed explanation of the physics. I just want to give you a sense of the number issue. One of the tests involved a Newtonian prediction as to the precession of the orbit of Mercury around the Sun. We know that from Kepler that planets are moving in elliptical orbits. And so an ellipse looks like this, and a circle has one center, an ellipse basically has two foci, 2 points, of reference for the construction of the ellipse. The orbit of Mercury and other planets has the Sun at one of the foci, and then the orbit kind of extends elliptically away from the sun. Turns out that that orbit precesses. If here's the oval at one point, at another point it's here, and at another point it's here, at another point it migrates. Okay? It migrates very slowly, but it migrates. Newtonian physics predicted the precession because of the influence of the gravitational effect of other planets. Einsteinian general relativity predicted a precession too. The difference between the Newtonian prediction and the Einsteinian prediction was 38 seconds of arc per century. Now, what's a second of arc? A circle has 360 degrees. A minute of arc is 1/60th of a degree. A second of arc is 3,600th of a degree. We're off 38 of those per century. Okay? So that, sometimes when I give these types of talks, people will say, yeah, but doesn't science sort of work? No. When we're operating at the level of that magnitude of significance, Newtonian versus Einsteinian physics, for example, things come down to extraordinarily fine distinctions. Well, the distinction between everything in science and what philosophy is achieving is an infinitely greater level of precision. So as precise as these distinctions are in science, they don't begin to approach the type of rigor of precision that philosophy is achieving. That's why philosophy is difficult. And that's why its results tend to be elusive to the general population, even the academic population, because what philosophy is doing is just not appreciated. In fact, one of the tasks of any philosopher is to explicate what philosophy is at all. There's that admonition of the Delphic Oracle, know thyself. That applies to philosophy too. And in fact, that's probably the single most important job of any philosopher, to clarify exactly what the nature of the study is. And most of the philosophers that I encountered at Harvard didn't have a sense. Not really. If you would ask them, can you tell us in a sentence what it is you're doing? Not even close. And in fact, which leads me to another framing. I'm going to get to controlled experiments, but I think these are, I never know what the most valuable comments are to make, and I think sometimes these framing comments are as valuable as anything else I'm going to say. In the context of this, one of the things that I am addressing, one of the things that I'm attacking, is scientism. This sort of uncritical faith in scientific methodology. Scientific results in terms of technologies, in terms of an atomic bomb, in terms of a rocket, in terms of anything that's like an actual object, those are incontrovertible. They exist. But other traditions, other modes of thinking about the world have produced significant results like that have existed. For example, throughout most of human history, what stood as the highest achievement of human technological endeavor was the pyramids. Until the Eiffel Tower, the pyramids were the tallest structure ever created by humanity. And in fact, people up until the Enlightenment, at least, and beyond, thought that there wasn't progress. The concept of progress only came with the Enlightenment. Throughout most of human history, people thought the past was superior to anything that's come since. And they looked at the pyramids. Look, these were superhuman. Look what they did. Well, what constructed the pyramids? What guided, what motivated the pyramids? Egyptian mythology. Okay? So when I talk about mythology, and I'm going to talk about mythology, because as we will see, science is a mythology. Not that it doesn't produce results, but that its fundamental theoretical structure is not rigorously validatable at any level. see that. But the fact that science can be characterized as a methodology doesn't mean it can't produce results. Of course it can. Of course it does. But the results are not quite at the level to use. And by the way, when I use anything that has some kind of religious connotation, sort of overtone, I'm not using it religiously. I'm using it metaphorically to represent an extreme solution to something. So if I use the word like save or salvation, I don't mean it in any religious context. What I mean is a complete solution here and now and independent of all possible future experience. I'm defining it operationally. So because science is not, as we will see, operating at the limit of rigor, can't save us. Its results aren't that strong. The only thing operating at that level in all the world, in all the academic world, in all the world of all the societies, is philosophy. Period. And how do I characterize philosophy? I do it in a sentence. Philosophy is the limit of rigor. Period. And in fact, when I have gone to different philosophy departments and gone up to different professors, I will say things like, I went to a local college, not too long ago, just to walk in, just to, say hello, maybe give a few talks. The philosophy department was in the Humanities and Social Sciences building. And I walked into the office and I talked to a professor and I talked to the chairman of the department, and I said, this is curious, because philosophy is not a humanities, it's not a social science, it's not a physical science. And they said, well, what is it? The limit of rigor. And it's like, this comes as like, on the one hand it comes like as a revelation, but they're struck by it, but the point is that that's the core of what I'm going to be addressing here. Relative to that level of rigor, nothing in science is incontrovertible. Nothing in science rises to that level and cannot. And for profound reasons, the most profound reasons of all. When I first got the invitation to give this talk, within an hour or so, an aphorism popped into my head. And that aphorism was, show me a study that can demonstrate causality, and I'll show you a world that cannot exist. So, again, but that's only something that becomes apparent at the highest possible level. And it also reminds me, too, of something that Emily Dickinson wrote. There's a poem of hers, I forget, actually it goes something, they call it Arcturus, the name of a star. I'd rather call it star. In other words, something within science is not quite as satisfying as we would like it to be, for reasons that are sometimes hard to pinpoint, but now we can pinpoint them. As much as science pretends to be rigorous, as much as controlled experiments pretend to give us incontrovertible results, they are not. And they are not at a level, again, that sort of operates at the level at which Einsteinian and Newtonian physics are distinguished. So at a fine level, at a level that we're not typically aware of, but at a decisive level. Okay. Scientism. One of the things that came to mind when that word enters my head is, first of all, Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein was opposed profoundly to this fetish that society was making of the sciences. He had a background in technology, engineering, physics. And when you're dealing with somebody of the level of Wittgenstein, you do not want to simply dismiss what he says out of hand. Right? Wittgenstein himself was a proponent of this approach. That the fact that, he starts his investigations, philosophical investigations, with a quotation from St. Augustine about the nature of language learning, that Wittgenstein's whole work is combating. Wittgenstein was asked, why did you begin, or he offers rhetorically, why did I begin with St. Augustine? I could have found the ideas expressed in 1,000, 100,000 different places. Well, because if so great a mind as St. Augustine held this view, it must be important. Not necessarily correct, right? I mean, there's a point to human progress, to our still being here. The Pythagoreans didn't solve all the problems, right? So, but we want to have that attitude. And I've very often, in encounters throughout the academic community, I've seen people that are narrow in their sort of embrace of ideas and not open to ideas being represented by powerful minds that are different than their own. Again, you may not, in the end, embrace those ideas. They may not be correct, but they need to be considered seriously. Okay? So, Wittgenstein, when he was, and Wittgenstein did not have really a background in experimental science, and so Wittgenstein's attack on science was never that sort of cogent or finished. Okay, this is, I think, in the end, more cogent. But okay, Wittgenstein early on was impressed with the writings of Freud. Read Freud. I read Freud when I was young too. I was not impressed with Freud. In fact, I thought Freud was an example of how not to do whatever it is you're doing. In the sense that, I had the sense that Freud could sit down, at 11 o'clock in the morning and decide by noon he's going to have a solution to some problem and he's going to write, 1,000 words about it or whatever it is. Okay? In other words, I got the sense, reading Freud, that his results were ad hoc. They were forced. Now, again, it's a little bit outside the context, but I want to say this. The alternative approach to creativity in any field is articulated by Keats, the poet Keats. Keats wrote about negative capability. Negative capability is the ability to hold a problem in your mind and not rush prematurely to a solution. Just allow it to develop organically. It's the approach of Einstein, of Planck, of Newton, of pretty much of anybody. That it was even the approach of Hitler, in the sense that you wonder, why was Hitler so dogmatic in some of the decisions he made, military decisions? Well, it was because he followed that same approach. He would think about something, and over a period of time, a solution would come to his mind, and once it came to his mind, he was committed to it. But he allowed the solution to develop. So it's characteristic of a lot of important results. It's how I work. I only respect things that come to me over some period of time, not that I just contrive an answer to. And Freud is largely contrivance. Now, Freud has not stood the test of time. And there are two aspects to that I wanted to point to. One, Wittgenstein gave a series of conversations on Freud that were recorded by students. They exist as conversations on Freud. And in that, he talked about how Freud was, even though he thought he was doing science, he wasn't doing science. He was doing pre-science. That there were no clear criteria of evaluation for most of what he was claiming. So, for example, his interpretation of dreams. There was no clear sense to decide what a correct interpretation was. To this day, there's no. Now, how would we end up with a clear sense of what would be a reasonable interpretation of dreams? If we had some methodology that always produced a certain kind of result. So, for example, if we had a schema of dream analysis that you use this approach to these dreams, and the next day you feel better about some aspect of your life. If it had that kind of efficacy, then we might embrace it. Nothing like that is offered in Freud. And Wittgenstein goes on to say that, well, sometimes it's what the dreamer thinks as an interpretation. Sometimes it's what the therapist thinks. Sometimes it's a collaboration. There's nothing clear, there's nothing decisive, there's nothing really legitimate about the process. It's arbitrary. And so Wittgenstein goes on to characterize Freud's work as a mythology. He was mythologizing. He was creating a powerful mythology, a compelling mythology in many respects, one that we're drawn into but he said that overall psychoanalysis has done very little good, has done a great deal of harm, and comparatively very little good. And that it takes a strong and keen and persistent criticism to see through the mythology that is being imposed upon you, a powerful mythology. But what was decisive about Freud is, at some point in the 30s, maybe, or 40s, I don't know the dates, his work was subject to controlled experimentation. They took a group of maybe 100 sort of patients with neuroses, divide them into two groups, give one group Freudian psychoanalytic intervention, and the other group nothing. And you know what they found? The same percentage of people recovered in both groups. End of Freud. In medical school, even when I was doing psychiatry, on a rotation in medical school, his name came up not once. Okay? So now Freud exists as literature. That's it. Okay. To the issue more concretely of controlled experimentation. As I said, Wittgenstein's attack on Freud is not at that level, because that's not what Wittgenstein was most comfortable thinking in terms of. But I entered molecular biology by accident. I was telling the story earlier. My ex-wife's friend was a person who became a renowned molecular biologist, someone who was responsible for ultimately co-developing immunotoxins, which is a major now branch of molecular biological research and biomedical intervention against a whole host of conditions. I ended up sort of basically just kind of volunteering in his lab to see if I liked it. And I did. But the first day in the lab, what you hear about is when you design an experiment, it must have adequate controls or it proves nothing, establishes nothing. Now, I developed a little bit of a reputation early on just because I was always comfortable with that notion. It made sense to me, the notion of the value of controls. But now we're talking a little bit about, we're talking about the issue of limitations. So, as sophisticated as that world is, the world of molecular biology at that level, as aware as everyone is of the nature of that methodology and what's required to demonstrate a compelling result. One day, my friend's mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. And I wasn't present for that diagnosis or for the interaction that followed, but my friend told me about it. His mother comes up to him and says, "What do I do? What is your recommendation? What type of chemotherapy, what type of cancer treatment do I want to embrace?" Based on someone who's at the center of that world. You know what he said to me? I didn't know what to say. Because in the history of cancer research, the entire history, there hasn't been one well-controlled experiment. Not one. So take your pick. And that's at the level of cancer, where we're most invested. Now, Malcolm Gladwell did a podcast a couple years ago. I haven't seen the podcast, full disclosure, but I was told about it, and I know the point of it. He was making the point that we are not capable of doing controlled experiments in biomedicine, in medicine, because of ethical constraints. We can't manipulate people. We can't, give one person a drug, and we can't do what Nazi doctors were trying to do during World War II. We can't do that. That violates our fundamental sense of human dignity. And that's a fundamental bar to our ability to do the kind of experiments that my friend, was looking for, but was never finding in the field. That's an issue. Doesn't matter. It's not the decisivation, because it's theoretically impossible to do a controlled experiment. Theoretically impossible. And you want to let that, I'll explain why, but you want to let that comment sink in. Because what that means is that scientific methodology, as we engage in it, at virtually every level of scientific results, does not have a clear and firm and defensible theoretical foundation. It's based on an approximation, not an ultimate rigor. And what that's going to mean is, and this is also profound, and this relates to my own results in molecular biology, it means that there are other methodologies possible. That science is not a privileged methodology. That there are others, and what I call these kinds of methodologies that are not rigorously grounded, that you cannot know in advance through some process of thought that you will definitively get a particular result. Only that it's suggestive, and then you go out and you test it, and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. Einstein's theory of relativity had to be tested. As beautiful as that was, as compelling as that was, as powerful as that was, as gifted as the mind that created it was, he didn't know until it was tested. And the fact of the matter is, tomorrow it may not work, may not sort of stand to the level of validation that it has so far. So, why is a controlled experiment theoretically impossible? And again, theoretically impossible at a high level of rigor, but not an unimaginable level of rigor. In the sense that, look at the level of rigor, that distinguished Einstein from Newton, that's unimaginable. So even if it's unimaginable, that's not an argument against it. Okay? So, my first introduction to philosophy came by accident. Most things that I value, most things that I respect creatively come by accident, not by a sort of, again, an ad hoc process. Was Alfred with Whitehead. I was young, I was 12, I remember this very clearly. When I was very young, I was reading math and science. As a lot of people did. I was part of the post-Sputnik generation. So, math and science. And I went into a bookstore, and I found this book, Science in the Modern World. Science, I'm reading science, let me read this book. But it wasn't science, it was philosophy. Whitehead was a mathematician, philosopher, educator. And this book was considered to be difficult philosophy. So, if you're raising children or raising grandchildren or whatever it is, expose them to sophisticated things at a young age. It doesn't matter whether they understand or not. All that matters is that it sort of trains your mind and you become sort of acculturated, to a high level of standard. So, but as difficult as Alfred of Whitehead was, for some reason, a lot of it engaged me from the start. And one of the things that most engaged me was a comment that he made early on. What matters most decisively are circumstances of such great generality that no one ever sees them because they're always right in front of our eyes. That became sort of that's still in my mind. That's in my mind every day. And as I was developing my philosophical work, I was always sort of attuned to, okay, what is it, that's right in front of my eyes that I might not be fully coming to terms with? Well, in terms of this talk, here's what it is. Look around. What do you see, most generally, that characterizes the space you're in? Turns out, the single most important aspect of this space, and I almost never hear it pointed out, and no one's ever sort of making much of this, the single most important aspect of our world, of our experience. The world is different in different directions. That. Because of that, it's theoretically impossible to do a controlled experiment. One object here, another object here. This is the experimenter group, this is the control group. They're in different grounds. They're in different environments. Enough said. You're done. Anything else is going to be only an approximate claim that may or may not work under any given set of circumstances. But it goes deeper. And I addressed this, by the way, in that play that Anna referred to, Phalaris' Bull. I talk a little bit in some length. That talk, by the way, well, that play is a little bit more, it's discursive, so it's accessible, I think. It's meant to be accessible, you know, to kind of a broader audience. So that's something that is also a source, you know, of these results in a slightly different format. Let's say the world was not different in different directions. Let's say there was nothing anywhere. So everything is a blank. Now, let's imagine, we'll do this as a thought experiment, right? Einstein famously liked thought experiments. Let's do a thought experiment. Let's picture 2 points. Imagine them mathematical points. So there are no distinguishing features of those points. Now, let's imagine a controlled experiment. You know, the one I use in the play is a person has cancer, and two people have cancer. They have identical cancers. They're not identical people because there are no such thing as identical people. Identical twins are not identical. From the standpoint of rigor, though, at the highest level, the level that philosophy is, any distinction is decisive. So, you're there, I'm here, you're there, I'm here, you're there, I'm here. What that means is nothing that is true of you rigorously is true of me. May turn out to be. If it's so, it's so. But we can't know in advance. That's the nature of rigor. Rigor, just to clarify, is a difference. Period. We exist in difference from everything else. That's the fundamental condition of existence itself. Dignity, human dignity, the dignity of any object is owing to that circumstance, to the condition of existence itself, that you are different from me. You're there, I'm here. Enough of a difference. That means I'm irreplaceable. You're irreplaceable. It's also the condition, just to broaden this, of philosophic freedom. When people talk about the truth that will set you free, that's the truth that sets you free. Because that's the truth that means that whatever has applied to anyone else, now or historically, including every concept relating to mortality, does not rigorously apply to you. May apply, who knows, but not rigorously. And that's what matters. That's what ultimately will save us. It also is the condition. Again, I tell you when I use a religious term, I'm using it religiously. I'm using it just because religions often embody extreme aspirations for complete solutions to our circumstance. Rigor at its limit provides what religions have sought as salvation or enlightenment. Just that. Just rigor at its limit. And again, I'd like to mention Wittgenstein. To help sort of fortify what I'm saying about that. Wittgenstein had not reached that point in his thought, okay? But he was getting close. And the signifier of that, Wittgenstein liked to begin his books, well, there are only 2 of his books, but with an epigraph, a quotation from something or someone he respected. He ended up beginning the philosophical investigations that were published posthumously with a quotation from the Austrian playwright Nestor. It's in the nature of every advance that it appears much greater than it actually is. It's a statement of humility. Good and well, right? There's a lot of that. You know, in these individuals at these levels, there's a lot of humility and there's a lot of arrogance, right? So that's a statement of humility. But if you challenged him in argument, you would experience Wittgenstein's arrogance. But in any case, statement of humility. But he said that wasn't what he was initially going to use. What he was initially going to use was a line from Shakespeare, fittingly, a line from King Lear, fittingly, maybe the greatest of Shakespeare's achievements. Now, that line that he didn't use, that I've actually made a lot of use of, is arguably the most important line in all of Shakespeare. It's the most important line in all the literature of all the world. Arguably, there can't be a more significant line. And what is that line? It's from Kent, the counselor to the king. I'll teach you differences. Period. Rigor is the limit of difference, just as philosophy is the limit of rigor. Well, so we have 2 points. One here, one there. Maybe this is our, one person that we give a sugar pill to. Maybe this is the person we give the drug to. Then we see what happens, right? That's what we do. We observe the progress, of the intervention relative to the control. Can we then say, in that circumstance where there's no ground, there's a blank ground, and these 2 points have no characteristics, that whatever the outcome is rigorously establishing the efficacy of the drug? And the answer is no. Because this point is here, and this point is there. And so far as we can ever say that distinction is enough of a difference that what applies to this does not rigorously apply to that. The fact that there are 2 things and not one is always the confounding variable in a controlled experiment that you can never eliminate. The process does not have a firm theoretical foundation in thought or otherwise. It only operates within. Now, I make a distinction. I don't like to use jargon. I don't like technical vocabulary. But, a couple of terms I do introduce just to make things a little simpler. In the end, epistemic and heuristic. Epistemic is a term. Both of those terms are in broad use. Heuristic was something that I learned from Einstein, actually, when I was around the same age as I encountered Whitehead. Einstein wrote a book with Leopold Infield, The Evolution of Physics. And that's where Einstein was talking about heuristics. Heuristics are just devices, approaches, methodologies, anything that leads to a result that we consider of interest, of value, but that are not rigorously grounded. So a heuristic approach may work, may not work. We don't know until we test. We can't know just in thought. We can't know by some rigorous determination. Okay? Science is a heuristic. A mythology is a heuristic. It's something that we cannot validate the fundamental presuppositions of, but we use it because maybe it'll lead to a better rocket. Maybe it'll lead to a better bomb. Whatever it is, we're interested in for whatever reason we're interested. Okay? But whatever a heuristic approach, science is heuristic because it's not theoretical. It's not theoretically grounded. It's not rigorous at the highest level. You cannot theoretically do a controlled experiment whose results you are compelled to accept. And that has all kinds of practical implications, by the way. Every time they do a study on, let's say, the efficacy of coffee. Does coffee have a benefit or is it deleterious to our health? And they keep expanding the study. They went from 500 people to 10,000 people to 250,000 people. The next study would be 10 million people. And what do they find? Fluctuations. Sometimes it shows benefits, sometimes it shows deleterious. That's because you're always going to have that. Because you cannot rigorously do a controlled experiment no matter what, no matter where you stand, no matter where in the universe you are. And notice the deep significance of it. Rigor is of distinction. We exist in distinction from everything else. In order for there to be a rigorously controlled experiment, everything would have to collapse to a point. The world wouldn't be. A world in which a controlled experiment is possible is a world that cannot exist. Period. Okay? So, this relates to something else. The idea of reproducibility of results in science. When we do an experiment, we're interested in being able to do that experiment again and get the same result. Why? Here's why. Because science is a utility. It's a heuristic. It's instrumental that can help us in some way to achieve something that we are interested in, not a rigor. Well, if you do a controlled experiment, any kind of experiment, and get a result that's not reproducible, that means that result is not of utility for you. It doesn't go to whether or not that initial result was valid as a depiction of the nature of the world itself at that time and place. So, for example, cold fusion. That's one of the contemporary holy grails, right, of science and technology. We would like to be able to do on our desktop, in our lab, at room temperature, what is happening inside the sun, or what's happening inside a thermonuclear device, right? Which takes enormous energy, enormous heat, enormous temperatures to otherwise achieve, right? Because hydrogen atoms that are being fused together are protons, they're positively charged, they repel each other. You have to overcome that repulsion. That takes enormous kinetic energies, enormous temperatures. Well, now, recently there have been some sort of positive sort of results relating to cold fusion on just a micro scale. We don't know yet. But every now and then, there's an article published saying, we did it. On October 17th, 1992, at 3 in the afternoon, we got cold fusion successfully to happen. But then, and those studies have been published, there are studies like that. But then when the next lab, or the next lab, or the next lab tries it, they don't get that result. They don't get cold fusion. And so it gets dismissed. Why is it getting dismissed? It's getting dismissed because if it's not reproducible, it's not of utility, of value, it doesn't have its heuristic significance for us. We can't use it. It doesn't go to the point of whether or not on that day, at that time, in that place, there was a successful achievement of cold fusion. It doesn't go to that at all. But we reject it within our scientific establishment, our scientific community, because science is not a rigor. It is a utility. It is a heuristic. It is achieving results that have some value, some interest for us here and now as we sort of deal with the world, right? I mean, what are laws of nature as we're formulating? We know that the things that science is generating, the things that laws of nature represent, are things that help us survive in the world such as it is. So, for example, stove is hot, you learn not to touch it or you'll get burned. Anything similar to that, you decide don't touch, you'll get burned. But those two things are approximately the same, right? They're two things, so they can't be identical. And if they're in different places, as two things have to be, that difference might be decisive for those things. But again, it's only philosophy that's rising to the level of a rigorous representation of the world. In fact, I have a little, in one of my books is introduced by a few paragraphs, partly about the language of philosophy, the fact that its language is violent. Philosophy is forcing you to results. It's operating at the limit of rigor. Science, you can doubt. You can doubt a result in science. It may not work tomorrow. Circumstances are different tomorrow than today. Philosophy, at the limit of rigor, is not doubtable. That's the nature of rigorous representation. And so I have an aphorism. Art seduces. Philosophy coerces. You have a choice. But not in that you're being imprisoned against your will in something that is of harm to you. You're being constrained to an absolute freedom. So it's only philosophy, it's only rigor at that limit that guarantees the freedom. It's kind of like, reminds me of the comment that Sartre famously made after World War II. So we were most free during the occupation. We were free of the past. philosophy, science is dependent on the past. Every result in science is a generalization of something from the past. But rigor frees us from that because of anything that's different between yesterday and today, then and now. Enough of a difference that rigor is a way out of whatever we think our fundamental limitations might be. It actually relates to the famous Sartrean formulation of the nature of existentialism. Existence precedes essence. You don't know. You think you know. You don't know. And in fact, that sort of is a fundamental, profound response to our circumstance. I have an aphorism: we suffer that we presume more than we know to the end of time. Another one, actually, that relates to that, maybe a little more clear. We suffer not because of what we know, and not because of what we do not know, and not because of what we cannot know, but because of what we think we know, unjustifiably, in the light of the strongest rigor. It's a simplifying process. I'm here to simplify, not to make things more complicated. Simplify. Rigor simplifies, and it frees us. It has that power, and that's the only thing that has that power. Now, if science is not a rigorous methodology, and it's not, controlled experiments are only giving us results that are approximately so, may be true, we don't know. As I said, there are other methodologies possible, other heuristics possible. I've developed one of those. I call it convergence theory. We've already seen that you can't rigorously compare 2 points. Well, if you can't rigorously compare 2 points, let's not worry about comparing 2 points. Let's deal with 1 point. And let's deal with what I call convergence at that point. Namely, bring things together at that point to achieve different objects. The more things that converge on a given point, the more likely it is you are going to have a robust object at that point. And that, but again, we're doing in heuristic space, not rigorous. We're bringing things together under a new set of circumstances today and yesterday, so we can't ever know in advance. But when I wrote my first book in philosophy, it was Considerations on the Nature of Things. At that point, I had no sense that anything I was doing philosophically had any bearing upon broader human concerns like human well-being or happiness or any kind of instrumentality. No idea. I discovered by accident, always, that in fact, not only does it have a bearing, it has a decisive bearing, philosophy at the limit of rigor, on everything, including our momentary suffering, including our momentary physical suffering, which is grounded in lots of presumptions about what we think is going on. After I finished my first book, which was the only thing I was interested in doing in that book was elaborating incontrovertible propositions about the world, doing philosophy per se. Philosophy is operating at the limit of rigor, it's operating at a level of incontestability. That's all I cared about. I had no interest in whether there was any utility associated with that whatsoever. But I said to myself, well, okay, so here we have this kind of abstract formulation. In the United States, nobody cares about philosophy, right? Nobody knows about philosophy. Nobody's studying philosophy. That's why the United States has not produced an Einstein and a Heisenberg. Einstein and Heisenberg were doing the physics of existentialism, of the circumstance that we cannot view the world from the outside. The United States, no. And in fact, famously, when the first Harry Potter book was published around the world, its title, as written, was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Not in the United States. They couldn't go with Philosopher's Stone because nobody knows what philosophers are. So they changed it, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. That tells you something. And again, the United States is good at a certain level of innovation, a certain level of creativity, not at the level of Einstein and Heisenberg. In fact, one of our best physicists was Feynman, Richard Feynman. I saw I guess it was an interview with him, where he was reflecting on different issues in physics at the end of his life. And he said that to that point, to that day, he didn't understand the fundamental source of the ideas for Einstein's general theory of relativity. Did not understand where they came from. Well, they came from late German radical empiricism. That's where they came from. But Feynman, didn't know that. He didn't have the background to know that, and perhaps to appreciate that. See this, but so convergence theory. I said to myself, okay, we have philosophy. What do people care about? Right. And I just kind of out of the air, I said, well, they care about cancer. Do that. That they care about. So if we have a set of sort of incontrovertible propositions, we're not going to get a cancer application at that level, but let's parameterize down. Let's add arbitrary parameters, effectively, within this realm of logical rigorous formulation, based on some general features that we know based on our science. So my interest at that time was, now this was some years ago, we didn't know a lot of the internal mechanisms of cellular carcinogenesis. We didn't know a lot about what was going wrong inside of a cell, right, to produce the cancerous results. So I said, well, let's not even worry about that. Let's parameterize a situation where the inside of the cell is a black box. We know nothing about it. But let's sort of deal with some of the, and I'm not going to go into this whole thing because it would take too long, but let's sort of parameterize down based on some general features of what we know about cells and we know about cancer cells. And let's make our objective to kill cancer cells. And let's sort of parameterize that problem. Now, I'm not doing philosophy now. I'm doing heuristics. I am doing convergence theory. What I am doing is something like linear programming. I'm adding conditions based upon some very general features of the situation that, again, not philosophical, okay? But I ended up parameterizing a space that was 19 degrees convergent. That meant there were basically 19 factors coming together to define that. Now, it turns out, I haven't revisited some of these ideas, but at one point, I had concluded that like an object, a stable object, can be achieved with a minimum of 6 elemental convergent features. Point is, here we have 19. And what that suggested was, if whatever this is, it was likely to be efficacious, likely to be effective, whatever it was. I didn't know what it was. I just knew that whatever it was inside that space. And then, I don't know, some time later, maybe it was a couple weeks or something, I realized that what was inside that space was a category of modified deleted virus was inside that space. And I ended up, as soon as I realized that, and then developed like how to go about actually engineering that, I went to I'd been in a program in molecular biology, a PhD program in molecular biology. I was respected in that program. I knew professors, I worked with professors, there were people I could trust. So I went to UCLA and I presented these results to some professors in molecular biology and microbiology, and the result was, if you could do this, any of this, well, that's a Nobel Prize and who knows what else, right? But I also had a sense too, based upon the nature of the analysis, it's going to take 10 to 15 years to kind of hurdle all the steps involved in doing this. But literally 12 years later, it was developed out of UCLA, out of that same group of professors. And it turned out to be, at that time, a subcategory of a cold virus. There are other possibilities. But that's now, like immunotoxins is a major area of cancer intervention. So is that. And that came specifically out of a quasi-philosophical application. Here's philosophy, here's everything else. Science has its limitations. Convergence theory also has its limitations. It's not pretending to be theoretically rigorous, as science is often pretending to be. It's just as powerful. Can be used, and it actually makes sense of what controlled experiments are doing. What controlled experiments are actually doing for us is pointing to strong convergence. Elements that can be brought together with the potential to create objects that are stable and that are in our interest. So you see, we free ourselves from the tyranny of science. It's a tool. It's only a tool. Because its foundation is not theoretically guaranteed, not theoretically rigorous, it's not a prison. It's not anything we are nailed to. We use it or we don't. If our physics leads us to design bridges that do not support us, we get a new physics. The connection between science and technology is not an accident. It's of the nature of the enterprise, because it's only a utility, not a rigorous representation of reality. That's the world. And I'll just quote, okay, so what I was going to say is something that I was going to quote. The job of philosophy is to establish the reality, incontrovertibly, exercising the internal criteria of an incontestable rigor. Standards of rigor may lengthen, and fair contentions eventually fall. What matters is what stands. Only what stands against all possible force can answer our needs. Only the irresistible solves the world. Okay, that's good? That's enough. Yes. I have more, but I think, should I go on? No? I think we're okay.
Thank you very much. Friedman, for this very inspiring lecture full of ideas and a real demonstration of an authentic philosophical discourse.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
As I mentioned in the beginning, we have some time left for discussion.
Oh, then I should coffee. Oh, great.
So if there are some questions or comments or demands of precision, please, I think that Mr. Friedman would be glad to.
I will not answer any questions, but I will entertain all your questions.
Okay.
No.
Okay, please.
Question? Question?
It was great privilege to listen, Professor,
Thank you.
your lecture. It was really great privilege.
Thank you.
I'm really happy that I came here. I'm chemist, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I'm chemist. But somehow I'm interested about the same general view
Yes.
to the reality.
Yes.
So of course, many thoughts came to my mind from this inspiring talk. You know, even I think first that what we call science generally can explain only, let us say, it is a trial to explain a part of the reality. It can never explain even the essential part of the reality. Probably what I say it is physical world that could be addressed by the science. But the very basic issues like Wittgenstein said, you know, if all scientific questions are solved, the important questions for the life, they would be even not touched.
Exactly. Absolutely.
That is
Yes.
Wittgenstein,
Yes.
what
Yes.
he said
Yes.
about the science.
Mm-hmm.
But even if we go to the very basic reasoning in this physical world, we consider space and time. Of course, it is a very simple logic that there are no two entities that are identical. They cannot be. Two different points in the space, keeping in mind that, let us say that the time permanently flows. Even at the same relative position, it doesn't mean the same time.
Yeah.
So that level of rigor, of course, cannot be achieved. But finally, that is explained somehow by Heraclitus, because he said,
Yes.
it is,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is not a thing. Everything what exists is just a flow, is just a process. If we speak about any sort of continuous process, then we never speak about two entities that are identical by any means. So even from these two very basic understanding
Yes.
of the space,
Yes.
time,
Yes.
and very deep philosophical thought, simple one, as you said,
Simple.
you know, like
Yes.
totally simple,
Yes.
which means probably true, yeah,
Yes.
very true, of course.
If it's too
So
complex.
no ideality, no identity really exists. I would also give you
Yeah.
another idea for the way of thinking. Even considering the most simple and let us say theoretical equations that are basis for a sort of theory. You know, for instance, the surface of a circle, surface of a circle is defined r square pi. Okay, that's the surface inside. Pi, the number p, pi, it is practically encountered in all basic equations, not in all, but in most of them, like number e, Euler number e.
Yes.
If we go in the real nature of number pi, number e, that we see that these so-called irrational numbers, they are numbers which never ends.
Yes.
They never end.
Yes.
That is not by the chance, you know. It is not that we don't know what is the end,
Right.
but it is the essence of that
Yes.
number
Yes.
which never ends.
So there's an inherent imprecision.
That is
Yes.
inherent,
Yes.
essential imprecision. But that sort of imprecision is actually the reflection of the essential reality. That's the reality. Because when we say that number has infinite position in the decimals, infinite, what that infinite means. If we say that the infinity is the basic feature of any system, that means that that feature is unknown for the system itself. It is not very distant feature somewhere that we cannot reach, but that feature exists. If that is reachable even by thought experiment, that is not infinite. Essential aspect is that the infinity means something which is essentially known, essentially unknown even for that system itself, not just for us as a conscious being.
Yes, I understand.
So I think that that's the way of thinking speaks about, even in the thought experiments, that unprecision, a sort of unprecision could be simply the essential aspect of the reality. And science, of course, is far away from that. I totally agree with you that what we need is a philosophy which will embrace, of course, everything. Otherwise, we cannot avoid two consequences of the science. The utility always means we produce something good, but equally something very bad.
Yeah, we can't know in advance. We don't know in advance.
So,
And as conditions change, were applicable, may no longer be, and it's always something that needs to be tested. It's like, it reminds me, in the other direction, in the late 19th century, there were articles being published in journals of philosophy. Journals of philosophy, journals of physics. Sometimes articles in physics were published in journals of philosophy, like Niels Bohr's work, right, on early quantum theory. That was in a journal of philosophy. But in journals of physics, in the late 19th century, physicists were publishing articles on the theoretical impossibility of flight, of the airplane. They proved the impossibility of it. And you can understand what was motivating that. It was hundreds of years of effort, starting with Leonardo, culminating in efforts, in the 18th and 19th centuries. Nothing is coming to bear fruition. So maybe it's theoretically impossible. And then a decade later, the Wright brothers proved that all of those articles were wrong. The same thing is true of issues with, cold fusion, of perpetual motion. Yes, patent offices laugh when they get proposals for a perpetual motion machine because there's a first law of thermodynamics. There's nothing sacred about the first law of thermodynamics. That's a generalization of our experience. We may, at some point, encounter some peculiarity of circumstance where that is no longer applicable. And so it's like, we had all these senses of what were the fundamental parameters for living systems, and that they certainly couldn't thrive at the bottom of the ocean, the Marianas Trench, or inside vents of steaming volcanoes under certain extreme conditions. Certainly there could not be life, but every time we look, what do we find? We find life. So, what we think is inconceivable because of our established principles is just a generalization from past experience. That's all. And we know fundamentally that past experience is not inviolate because from the standpoint of rigor, tomorrow is different from today by the fact that it's tomorrow and not today. And it reminds me too, I like to point out that famous definition of insanity. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. No, the insanity is thinking that that's the definition of insanity. Because in this world, you can't do the same thing repeatedly, even if you try. And the fact is that what we call practice is doing the same thing over and over and eventually achieving mastery, eventually achieving a different result. Even if we could do exactly the same thing over and over, it's against a different background of experience. It's the second and not the first, the fourth and not the third. That's enough of a distinction. So we're trapped. We trap ourselves. Oh, here, I want to read one. Can I read one little thing? It's a summary that I was going to read, but I think it's a nice summary. And I think, here, let me just read it. I have to put on my glasses. It's just a summary of this. But my summaries that are written, have a certain, I hope, poetic aspect that helps communicate the feeling associated with this. If I have my glasses, I have my glasses. If I don't have my glasses, I'll borrow yours. No, I have my glasses. Okay, these are just imagine. Okay. Okay, so, and this actually starts one of my websites. I build my own websites, which means that you can't navigate them. It's like they're kind of like video games. They're meant to be sort of obscure, impenetrable, a challenge. Okay, but this is at the beginning of like my first such website. And actually, there's a phrase that I skywrote over Los Angeles, Eden. Eden, I use that again as a metaphor for a complete solution. Eden 2 is not equal to 1. Okay? 2 points are not equal to 1. The solution to the problem of human suffering is existence. That 2 points in any conceptual space, 2 objects with identical properties, are distinguishable, because of which we cannot perfectly control an experiment and cannot validate a conclusion, except in the oversimplifications of our mind. And so science is aesthetics and heuristics. It's logic, a theoretical impossibility. We can do controlled experiments mentally, not physically. So as to say, we suffer, not existentially, but in thought. The point of individuation is salvation. Question?
Yes, I have prepared the question before I came here.
Oh.
And, I want to ask you first the questions which are in regard of your lecture, and then I will ask the other ones, and which on a basis for what I read something from you on the internet.
Okay.
First I want to ask you to clarify, did you say there were no cancer experiments?
No sufficiently controlled experiments in the history of cancer research to give a definitive guide for what direction to take. That's right.
And you don't consider in this experimental mice, when we rub it with the nylon, we can cause skin cancer. This is not.
No, it's.
You don't think that we can claim that nylon can cause skin cancer?
Again, this is in the realm of heuristics. So the thing is, if we get a result that something, and actually, I had my mother was British, and when I was growing up, I spent a lot of time in England. And one of my cousins that I was very close with ended up marrying a cancer researcher. Now this was in like the 60s. And what that cancer researcher was doing and everybody in the 60s was doing this in like laboratories, was taking substances and putting them on like rats or mice and seeing what caused cancer and what didn't. So you went into his lab and there were like 1,000 cages, with 1,000 mice, and they all had different patches of different types of substances to see what might produce cancer. Now, the point is that, yes, we're concerned about things like cancer, so we have a relatively low bar in terms of what we're going to embrace. So, for example, nylon causes cancer, in this person, that person, the other person, 100 people, 1,000 people. It's probably prudent, as just a utility, stay away from it. But again, any difference between two people, the difference between you and me, aside from that theoretical distinction of you're there, I'm there, it amazes me, and I was telling Anna this today, that two people are even possible, in the sense that the amount of complexity, biological complexity that you find in a given person, you would think is so unimaginable that maybe only one such functioning person was possible. That you couldn't just change any, that you would think that things were so constrained to produce these kind of results that you change one little thing and it all falls apart. So it amazes me that we operate within this realm of tolerances. In other words, that our biological systems, our chemical systems are capable of performing, as they do within tolerances, not within precisions, limiting precisions, but like things don't have to be exactly the same. Like, my cell phone has lots of components. If one of those components fails, I can go and get a replacement. That component replacement is not going to be identical, but close enough, right? Technologies operate within those tolerances. They're not constrained like that. If they were, then only one such thing like us would be possible. So the point is that, yes, and we know this, right, that there is nothing in clinical medicine that's 100%. Not anything. So, you know what I mean? So there is any type of cancer that is 100% fatal no matter what. Not even the worst. But prudently, if something has been shown in a laboratory, more or less in many cases, more of the time than not, to produce cancer, I'm going to stay away. Just prudently, but not rigorously. Because, again, my distinction from the people that were being studied or tested, or the situation in which it was being tested, is enough to mean that rigorously, that result does not apply to me. It may apply, and I'm going to be prudent, and I'm going to stay away because, I don't like cancer, per se. I like viruses. I love viruses, because I find them elegant, they're simple, they're the simplest structures really that are kind of functional sort of, as an organismic kind of thing. They're not organisms, but, I love their beauty. There's a crystalline beauty to me in viruses, and there's a simplicity and an elegance, and that's why most of my work in molecular biology was on viruses. I like them. But cancer, I'm not so enthusiastic about. That's more, aesthetically, I find, when you look at cancer cells under a microscope, they're a mess. A mess. It's like they're all different, there's all kinds of variations, there's not order. Whereas viruses are ordered. And that's one of the things that drew me to them as a chemotherapeutic agent. They're powerful, they're controllable. And I don't mean, by the way, you hear about research where we're talking about gain of function with viruses. You're adding capabilities. All of my results were based upon removal of function, reduction of function of that virus. So I was going in a different direction. But it's amazing how much of, and I say it here, like how much aesthetics draws, science forward. Much of Einstein's work was drawn, it wasn't rigorous reasoning at all. You read through his paper on E = mc squared, it's like 3 pages. There's no rigor. It's it's almost like island hopping during World War II. He kind of jumps here and then he jumps there, and then on the horizon you could see, this thing appearing, E = mc squared, and the beauty of it was compelling to him. So again, I make a lot of decisions based upon a lot of different considerations. But when, for example, Ebola first came out, it was a horrifying, kind of virus. But my reaction was, this is excellent. This is a powerful virus. This can be used. See what I mean?
Do you think that terminology is, in this sense, is very important? Because, of course, I agree that Freud is art, and he was nominated for a Nobel Prize for Literature.
Yes, right? Yes.
Yes, and but now we can see that, like in many other cases, he was actually right even as a scientist, because there's a quote for him, which is not a quote, but it's sublimation, that bad habit is the worst disease. And now we know from the new branch of medicine that indeed, if you have a bad habit, and then you need abstination, and that really in your brain are constructed those protein complexes.
Yes.
And then when you don't practice this habit, then they are disappearing, and then you're healthy again. So
there's no question that Freud said interesting things, among his writings. The other night I was looking at some Proust. Proust said lots of interesting things. Compelling things, philosophically compelling, but again, that doesn't make him, and what's interesting about Freud is, Freud had originally aspired to be a philosopher. And you know why he did not go in that direction? It's a fascinating reason.
He said that because he didn't have enough money, and he had to get a lot of people to pay tickets, and he can live from it.
There's that aspect. There's also another aspect. He wasn't good at math. And you can't do philosophy at the highest level if you have some specific intellectual limitation like that. So, because if you're operating at a philosophical level with some particular intellectual limitation, you're going to be biased by that limitation. So, when you look at all the greatest philosophers, they're as good at the mathematical sciences as they are at verbal sort of representation. And that is essential. It's so it's fascinating. I mean, I don't remember where I read that, but early on, because I was fascinated by Freud also, but again, I thought he was a good writer, more than anything. And he was trained as a physician. He had a background in the sciences, but literally at some point he made the comment that he would probably have been a philosopher if he had been more good at math. Yes. Is that? Do we have another question from?
If you will give a chance.
It's okay for me. Did anybody else want to ask anything before? Question? Yes, sure.
So would you say that math has the same level of rigor as philosophy, because it does kind of deal with absolute?
It's the highest level of rigor within heuristic space, not at the level of philosophy itself. And you know why? Ultimately, the equal sign. In fact, I didn't present, as I said, there are many ways that I can sort of do this talk or do related talks. And this is a very important question, actually. I distinguish heuristic and epistemic space. Okay? In heuristic space, two things are approximately equal for some purpose or other. In epistemic space, there's no equality. So, and these are not narrowly defined spaces or concepts. These are robust structures that can be characterized from a lot of different directions. So, for example, I can characterize a heuristic space as a convergent space. I characterize an epistemic space as a divergent space. Now, mathematically, or kind of mathematically, the fundamental condition of a heuristic space is A equals A. And notice, that's convergent structure. You're saying two things, even if A here, same. You're bringing them together. The equal sign is doing that. The fundamental condition of epistemic space, which is the space in which we exist. And by the way, if you want to sort of have a sense of where is that, what's the we are seeing things conceptually. All of our concepts are kind of seeing approximate similarities between things. Our recognition of identity, that you're the same this second as now. Our ability to, a linguistic space is a heuristic space. It's not a space operating at the highest level of rigor. How do we know that? Because every time you say something, it's slightly different. Slightly different intonation. Slightly different, sort of voice pattern. In
different time moments.
Yes, different time moments. In epistemic space, there's no communication. It's a silent space in that way. It's, we talk about the silence of God. Epistemic space gives you the silence of God in terms of that non-communicability. So the fundamental condition of epistemic space, reality, is A is not equal to A. There is no identity. Everything is distinct and distinguishable if it's two and not one. So the equal sign.
Question is why?
Yeah.
Because there is difference. Why we have difference?
Why is there a difference?
Where comes difference?
The difference comes from the fact that that in this world there is utility.
Philosophically, why we have difference? Do you understand?
I think so, in the sense that how we are, in order to survive, that this world has certain stabilities, just by nature, by accident. We are not, for example, living at the quantum mechanical level. If we were living at the quantum mechanical level, what I'm saying about the nature of philosophical space would be that what we would see in every direction. There wouldn't be heuristic space. Heuristic space is because, if you like, we're seeing things at a distance from reality. As we get close, things break down and distinctions begin to emerge. So our heuristic space is, if you like, the world at a distance, an approximation to the world. And that's a strong tendency. And the reason for that is, as long as this world has these general characteristics, and we have these general characteristics, there is survival value to our recognition of these types of similarities. That, again, this hot stove there, the thing that looks like the hot stove there, similar, so we formulate the law, hot stoves burn, should be avoided. Okay? But if this world, it's, if you like, as far as we can say philosophically, an accident that we are at this level, the world is at this level of relative stability that our concepts pertain one moment to the next. But there's no guarantee. And the only thing that there is a guarantee of is sufficient distinction, moment to moment, point by point, object by object, to guarantee that the fundamental reality is one of divergence, distinction, that the, right?
Yeah, I would like to enter the discussion,
Oh.
but don't want to monopolize the position, so please, if you have other questions. Yeah. Just, yes.
Did that answer the
Yes. Just a quick comment.
Of course.
So for me, one of the most interesting developments of the course of your idea was this starting from some scientific, logical, and philosophical abstract arguments, and something that is connected to the empirical reality of the world, with a very scientific aspect. But I think that one of the ultimate conclusions, the apex of your of the intellectual construction, it strikes me the fact that it has the most profound humanistic implication, in that the thought culminates in affirmation of the fundamental dignity and freedom of individual existence. So for me, it was really amazing how, starting from the abstract thoughts and those distinctions between epistemic and rigorous. At the highest limits of rigor, we find fundamental irreducibility, ontological, metaphysical irreducibility of the individual existence, and the dignity of this irreplaceable place in which each one of us stands. And so this connection between the scientific and the humanistic and philosophical, I think it's very important to affirm. Maybe this is the real place to do this. And maybe Ljubča, as you said, maybe there's some, I mean, it is speculation, some metaphysical reasons of the affirmation of the difference between, because here Aristotle comes again to my mind. This concept of proteusia, of the primary substance, the individual as the primary substance in categories. He defines the primary substance as something which cannot be in anything else. This is the ultimate ontological subject that has independent existence, but also cannot be predicated on anything else because it is individual. This is not. It is not applicable to anything else than itself. So this concept of individual substances that developed in the medieval philosophy, maybe it has something to do with this. I mean, the irreducibility of the individual existence. So,
Well, I also want, thank you. Heuristic space is coming from, where this approximate space is coming from, is from the nature of society and the nature of language as an instrument of social coordination. That's where it's coming from ultimately. The sense of, I mentioned that one can sort of point to, there are lots of different ways, I told you I have lots of aphorisms, but one can point to the sense that we are seeing the world from the outside as one thing that one can point at as the ultimate source of human suffering. I can develop that idea. That's an artifact of language. Now, when Pascal writes about how we are frail, we cannot contend with lions and tigers and bears in nature. We are weak physically compared to a lot of other predators. How do we survive? What's our greatest advantage? Well, Pascal pointed to our brain, right, our thinking capability. That we are reeds, we are frail as reeds, but we are thinking reeds. He was wrong. That's not the accurate characterization. Our ability to survive is entirely based upon our ability to form social networks. And social networks, what are social networks? They're convergent structures. Anytime you're dealing with something that is convergent, you are in heuristic space. Now, for purposes of survival, we come together. We are strong. In fact, I am not fundamentally social by nature. Okay, I am an introvert. And I remember one day a friend of mine said, I made some comment about the degree to which we're social animals, and Aristotle, right? And my friend said, we're the most social of animals. And I thought to myself, oh my God, why am I a human being? But the point is that what allows us to survive is the ability to cooperate in groups. The function of language is not to communicate ideas. That's secondary. That's artifactual. That just happens to arise. The fundamental function of language is to coordinate behavior, period. And it's that serving a societal function, serving a heuristic function that is placing us in this space where we are not living the philosophic reality of moment-to-moment distinction, but the sort of the convenience and the instrumentality of being able to sort of cohere. And so see people as similar as individuals. And our concepts are all based upon those kinds of approximate similarities. But like that basic question. Yes, I like monads. Yes, but like that whole question of the problem of other minds. Fundamental philosophical problem. Are you people, or are you sophisticated automata? Do you have an inner life or not? What is that question? How do we address that question? We think when we look at others that we're seeing, the eyes are the window to the soul. We think we are seeing, their inner life. We are not seeing their inner life. And in fact, to get to the core of that problem, actually, what taught me about that problem, the solution to that problem, was I developed a relationship with squirrels. Because I had a neighbor who was feeding squirrels. And that kind of introduced me to them. Squirrels are fascinating creatures because they are like us in lots of ways. They live in, tree squirrels, they live in trees. We came from trees, evolutionarily. Their vision and their touch are most important for their survival. When you live in a tree, you need to be able to grasp and you need to be able to, see positive and negative space. By the way, our hands, how it's often said that this is what characterizes humanity, the opposable thumb? Nonsense. That is not true. All primates have opposable thumbs. This right here, do you know what this is? This is for grasping branches of trees. If you want to see the key to evolution, you look at your feet. The big toe used to be opposable, like the thumb is. We lost that around 3 million years ago at the time of Lucy, that fossil. Lucy died of a broken femur. She probably died from falling out of a tree because she was no longer adapted to life in a tree. As evolutionarily, we were moving towards terrestrial bipedalism. But so with squirrels, when I first started dealing with squirrels, they were like, they're animals, and I don't think of them as having like an inner life of consciousness, right? But I discovered ways of communicating with them. Like I discovered that if I said the phrase, "it's okay," if they were running away, they would stop. It's okay. Just those words. It's okay. Nothing else worked. Just those words. It's okay. And then I discovered they could sort of cognize the pointing gesture. If I put nuts there, and they were looking at me, and they didn't see the nuts, and if I pointed, they'd look over there. As soon as I began to communicate, they developed an inner life. Now, imagine that, none of your words were able to influence anyone else's behavior. Imagine there was nothing you could do to coordinate to influence the behavior of anybody else short of force. If that were the case, if you lived in that world where nothing you could say or do would influence anybody else, those people would begin to lose the inner life that you're seeing in them.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm sorry we have to.
Oh no! Okay, I'm going to stay. No.
Okay, but I really want to most warmly thank you for this wonderful encounter. All of you for coming here and for sharing your valuable ideas and time with us. And I hope that it is only a beginning of a series of similar events.